What's up, fight fans? It's Big Tone MMA and Nolan Kings, aka MMA Kings,
Did you
back.
just put a plural on my name?
Did I?
You said Nolan Kings.
Kings, the multiple Kings, and we're back. It's not. It's not. It's ContenderCast now, unfortunately,
Yeah.
due to the
I feel like
liberal.
that was the white decision though.
You thought you're taking shots at my name now. Ah. Yeah, the white decision apparently was shot down by all you snowflakes out there. So we're stuck with the contender cast, which does the job, but very boring, kind of like your girlfriend. Anyway, let's jump into the fights. It was a crazy episode. I don't think either of us predicted this kind of shenanigans going on coming into
No,
it.
sir. No, sir. This was I think at the end of the season we'll be looking back at episode 2 as being one of the better ones. If not, this season's gonna be unreal because this was I don't wanna get too far ahead of myself, but this episode was unreal.
And I know you had said, the first fight was a sneaky, fight or, fight of the, there's no fight of the nights, but you get what I'm saying. It could be the best fight of the night, I
Yeah.
guess. And it turned out to be a pretty damn good one. We had Dwight Grant, Tyler Hill at 175 pounds. Dwight Grant, trains out of AKA. A little bit. I think he was the guy who was a little bit older, right? He's in his
Yeah.
30s.
He was 33, so I was a little nervous there that they would kind of give him the Chris Curtis business and kind of no matter what he does, oh, he's a little older, so he doesn't count. That type of a deal. But yeah, that's not what ended up happening, right?
No, no. I mean, he showed off, the stand up. I think he even got, uh, there was some takedowns at one point, right?
I'm trying to remember. It's funny when you sit down and watch that many fights in a short period of time. It's kind of trying to play it over in my head, but I think honestly it was mostly standing. I don't remember it hitting the ground or not. Maybe once against the cage, but I'll have to go back and watch it. But overall, it was mostly on the feet, and yeah, man, it was a good striking display. It was an interesting fight in that the first round, Tyler Hill was pushing the action, giving that classic Mississippi Alan Belcher MMA style of just going right at the opponent without any fear. Something we kind of expected without even, you wouldn't even have to necessarily watch tape on him to know that. Just Jason Knight, Brandon Davis, Chase Sherman all have that same type of badass style where they just come forward like that. So Tyler Hill fit right in that bunch. He's very big welterweight, excuse me. Some places have him listed at
Looks like a
6'3".
middleweight.
Yeah, some places have him listed at 6'4", but he's just a big man. But yeah, Dwight Grant was just didn't even care. He was counter punching, landing cleanly, good range, good distance. It was just the first round was all Hill going forward, and it was just Grant just tagging him with the counter punches, which I thought his timing was great, his head movement was great, and that after that first round, I was thoroughly impressed. It wasn't the 8-second finish of last week or Greg Hardy getting a crazy knockout, but I like performances like that where you can see a complete performance out of a guy. You don't get the first exchange of the fight, somebody gets knocked down. You get to see what the fighter actually does when, in the cage in a scenario where he has to, he can't just go out there and blast somebody. So I love seeing that. And I think he's a prospect to watch, at 33 years old. I said in the broadcast, he had 6 fights fall out in a row with his opponents. So it's been a little while for him, but he's back in the win column and he's got a UFC contract.
Yeah, that just shows you guys, don't want to fight him. And, looking back now, it does say he was credited with a takedown. So obviously just showing an overall very complete game, coming out of AKA with the slick game plan, of course, too. Was aware that Tyler Hill was going to be pushing the action and was ready with his counter punches. And you mentioned Greg Hardy. I mean, this knockout was very reminiscent of Greg Hardy last week, where, the finishing sequence is backwards, I guess, because he lands the big overhand right and then the left finishes him. Whereas last week it was the left and then the right. But still, just kind of that giant 1-2 that sent, Tyler Hill into La La Land. It was a massive, highlight reel KO. And I said right after that, if this isn't contract worthy, then we're in for an epic episode. And we definitely were, because it got crazier from here. Next fight on the card, we had returning Ryan Spann. Of course, fought last year. I believe you interviewed him, or have interviewed him quite a few times, right, Nolan?
Yeah, I interviewed him, I think, twice before. He wasn't really – I was a little late with my interviews this time around, so I talked to him a little bit last week, but he was kind of busy. So he's very polite, very nice guy. He's a little shy, it seems like, even though he's kind of got that in-cage persona with the Superman and everything. He seems kind of, I don't think necessarily him doing interviews is his favorite thing, but he's always been cool with it. He's always been a nice guy, and he's a guy whose career has had some serious peaks and valleys. He fought for the LFA belt or legacy belt a number of times, and didn't win. And then he lost on Contender Series, like you said, and now he came back on this show tonight and put on a pretty good performance.
I mean, that was since we saw him last on the Contender Series, dude went 3-0 in LFA. Most recently, first round KO of Alex Nicholson, who of course just had that flying knee KO in PFL. And
yeah, I believe Nicholson's either 4-1 or 5-1 since getting cut from the UFC. So that's a good win to have on your record.
Big win for him. Obviously Alex Nicholson, also of Cam Soda fame. So huge name on his record, and he adds Alliance MMA's Emiliano Sordi. Just dominant performance, 26 seconds. I mean, what is there really else to say, Nolan?
Yeah, not much. I mean, the UFC, from my understanding, from what managers and fighters have told me, is that the UFC really wanted to start delving into some of these Latin American markets, the South, these Mexico, Argentina. They're going to see a guy from Puerto Rico who was on last year, but he's going to be back on this year. So they went out of their way definitely to try to build those markets up. And it's kind of interesting because Canada, they kind of did the opposite. They offered 2 contracts out to people that I know in Canada, and neither one of them could take it. And then all the other ones, they were like, yeah, we're not really interested in Canadians right now. We're only doing Americans and some Latin America fighters. So they definitely are looking to expand there. I think Sordi, was the sport's still relatively new there. There's not a ton of guys that they could bring in, but Sordi was one of the best that they had in the division that they needed fighters. So he was serviceable enough to go in there. Obviously things didn't go his way. It was only one or 2 exchanges, and then he got choked out. But it's another good fighter that Spann's beaten. It's somebody that they could have thrown him in LFA, and nobody would have necessarily complained. So that was a good performance by the LFA light heavyweight champion.
Yeah, it probably doesn't hurt that Sordi, trains out of a giant camp in Alliance MMA, which we'll get to later in the main event here. But moving on, Austin Springer and Giga, is that what you say? Why don't you pronounce it?
Giga Chikadze, come on.
Giga.
It's kind of Italian sounding, right?
Nah, Chikadze.
Yeah.
See, I'd say everything with an Italian accent, then people would get mad at me. Chikadze.
There you go.
Yeah. But I mean, this was the one where I guess if you want to say a hype train might have gotten a little off the rails here, this might be it. Giga, of course, glory fighter, kickboxer, extensive career in kickboxing. Austin Springer just had a kind of grinding career up to this point, fighting in, mostly promotions you probably never heard of, and then that one stint on the Ultimate Fighter where he lost pretty badly. So I'm not the fight. I once it got into the second round, you just kind of knew neither of these guys were getting a contract no matter what, right?
For sure, yeah. It was one of those cases where, to be Austin Springer in that situation, there's not necessarily a huge window of opportunity for you to get the ultimate goal of a contract. I feel like, it was kind of I won't say lose because he still put on a good performance in front of a large audience in front of the UFC. Like you can't hate on him for it because he fought a very good fight for who he was matched up against. But being a 3 weeks notice replacement against a guy that they clearly the UFC clearly would like to have Giga on their roster. I think he's having a glory kickboxer come over. Gokhan Saki, we saw it. The type of hype he gets and the type of push he gets. So for them to be able to add a lighter weight version was really exciting with some serious kicks and knockout power. Like that's what they wanted. So for Springer to come in here, not necessarily a huge, like I said, a huge window of opportunity for him to seize what they were giving him. But with that being said, when I talked to him last week, he kind of knew this going in. He was telling me, honestly, like if I could go in there and put on an exciting performance and think I could still win, like I would do that. But for me, like I got to get my priorities straight, and the win is the most important thing in this type of scenario where I'm going in against a guy that's a high-level kickboxer. So he honestly, what he told me beforehand, if you go and read my interview with him on MMA Today, is exactly what he did. He said he's going to come out, he's going to throw a lot of strikes in the first round, he's going to wow people with his power, and then from there, I'm going to just the cardio is going to be on my side, and I'm going to grind him out and finish him, and that's exactly what he did. So good prediction for him. It's one of the more top 5 or 6 more like accurate predictions that I've heard from fighters. A lot of times people will throw around things that they think is going to happen and it doesn't. But, this is one of the ones that will stick out to me just because he did literally say exactly what happened.
Yeah. And I mean, he climbs to 11-3. There was hints on the broadcast too, just from comments, that he apparently made, the win was the most important thing.
Yeah.
So he definitely understood the situation, and this will clearly lead to, more high-profile fights for him than he was previously, and, possibly eventual shots, back at the UFC, Bellator, somewhere like that.
And one more thing I want to add about that, too, is that they had a really tough time finding Giga an opponent. I mean, when they did the rundown, like when they first – I don't remember when it was. It was on – UFC 224, I think the pay-per-view was the first time they aired the Contender Series commercial, and they showed the first 4 lineups for the Contender Series, and he was the only one that had Giga Chikadze versus TBA, and at that time I had heard like 3 or 4 names that were thrown out there, and either the guys, one guy he was supposed to fight was Youssef Zalal, who we reported about that fight, and he ended up having to pull out because of Ramadan or something. He didn't feel like having a fight during that. And then there were a number of guys from other weight classes. They tried to get some bantamweights to move up to featherweight, some lightweights to move down to featherweight. And just like, everybody that I talked to, there was 2 fighters that I talked to that were offered that fight, and they both said that they thought it was it was on short notice, and B, it was a high risk, low reward fight. So for Springer to take it, I'm sure the UFC brass takes that into account, and if he goes and racks up a bunch of wins and improves and is exciting, it wouldn't shock me if they brought him back for a short notice fight or something like we saw them do with a bunch of people from season 1.
Yeah, and as far as Giga's side goes, I mean, this is what the Contender Series is for, is to see, if you deserve a UFC contract. And clearly he has some things he needs to work on. The cardio was not there. The takedown defense, big work in progress. Actually was surprised by when he was on his back, he actually seemed to know what he was doing. So that was a plus for him, I guess, if you want to take some silver lining, is that he's not completely a fish out of water off his back. But clearly the cardio and the takedown defense are not ready. So Contender Series did what it needed to do and weeded out somebody who's just not ready for the big show yet. But moving on, this was basically the people's main event here. You know, you had.
I was just blabbing with my mic off, looking like an idiot. So
Were you? What were you
yeah,
saying?
no, I was just gonna say that like you said, I thought the thing that stuck out to me that could be a room for improvement is it looked like he knew the right things to do in certain scenarios, but he didn't necessarily know how to execute them well. Like his submissions where he's
Yeah,
doing the right stuff, but Springer would just step out of it, stuff like that. So it's just more of, I think, with repetition of the ground game and stuff. I thought he had some nice judo too. He kind of had a couple little throws, kind of arm drag type things. Not like a full judo throw, but kind of they were in it's almost like when you see a lot of times in WMMA fights when they get both kind of like in a headlock position. He won a lot of the 50-50.
the head and arm throw.
Yeah, kind of like what they're each have a hook around, like that type of a thing. So I thought he did pretty, for a guy that's only had 6 MMA fights and none of them have been against this type of level of opponent. This isn't the end for him if he doesn't want it to be. He still has a future.
The pieces are there. He just has to put them all together, basically.
Exactly.
On to the people's main event, if you want to call it that. Anthony Fluffy Hernandez taking on Jordan Wright. If you read Alex's amazing interview with Anthony, I think there's actually a follow-up interview. Really emotional story. Kind of covered like a little bit of everything. Like got into his father's passing, and then also what I guess Jordan Wright. There was some beef because Jordan Wright, shook his hand and was very respectful to him when they met, and then did an interview like a few days later and badmouthed him and said he was going to knock him out in the first round or whatever. And I don't think Anthony Hernandez really needed any more motivation than he already had, because guy came into the cage looking, ready to kill, and that's all. That's what he did. I mean, there's not a whole lot to talk about fight wise. He just kind of mauled. It looked like
Yeah, absolutely.
Bear with Leonardo DiCaprio, basically. I don't know what else to say about the fight.
Yeah, I mean, I've only watched it over that one time and then a couple of replays that they showed of the actual finish. But in my recollection, there was one sequence right at the beginning. I guess the whole fight was at the beginning, so that's not really specific. But where I think right through kind of a kick, and it sent Hernandez back a little bit. And Hernandez looked like a man on a mission. He went back, and then he just went straight forward, like just locked in, loaded, and that's when the finish came. So very determined, very ready to go. Like I said, and I tweeted before, I think he's the best middleweight. I guess you can't say outside the UFC anymore. He's the best middleweight prospect outside the UFC before tonight in North America. So for them, to pick him up, that was a great signing. But I think it also brings up an issue that I'm starting to maybe have with this season's Contender series that, I don't know how you can – I'm being nitpicky because this season's been awesome, so I can't really be too mad. But I think that if you look at last season and this season, there's a difference in talent and matchmaking. Last season, there was a lot less well-known talent, but there was better matchmaking. A lot of the lines were fairly even. A lot of the fights weren't necessarily these quick finishes. We had our fair share of those, but a lot of them were pretty competitive. And now I feel like this season, if you look at last card and this one, like the talent level is so much better. We have LFA champions. We have, this Greg Hardy who's turning into like a heavyweight, the next big thing in heavyweight, stuff like that, where last season was a lot more regional guys that we'd never heard of. That being said, like the odds, if you look at them for last week and this week, like every single fight, there was like a massive underdog and a massive favorite, except for maybe 3 that I can think of off the top of my head that were under like minus 300, plus 300 type deals. So I'm just kind of a little bit nervous about that because, Austin Springer's been the only underdog that's won this season in 9 fights. So I just, that's my only complaint is that I just, the fight, this bringing me back to my original point before I digress too much was, this fight, if you looked at it, was 6-0 versus 9-0. But Jordan Wright, as Chaz Skelly, UFC featherweight, pointed out on Twitter.
Mr. Analyst, Chaz Skelly.
Yeah, literally. Jordan Wright only had 2 opponents out of his 9 had a win, a professional win. He fought a guy that was 0-22 once. He fought a guy that was 0-14 once. And meanwhile, Anthony Hernandez has 6 fights, and his last one he ran through Brendan Allen, who's a guy that's UFC caliber. one of LFA's top fighters. So I would like to maybe see a little bit more care in that type of matchmaking, just because the records are a little deceiving. But honestly, man, these finishes have been brutal and violent, and I'm sure going forward we're going to have some crazy upsets and stuff like that too. So that's just me being a little bitch and complaining about something. So I needed to get that in at least once per podcast.
No, that's a fair point, because it's weird that you brought that up, because I have had my my more betting or gambling type audience, messaging me and not so much complaining, but just just kind of pointing out that the Contender Series so far has been incredibly lopsided as far as odds go, and much more of like showcase type fights, something kind of Bellator is known for. They'll match one of their young guys up with someone that'll be like minus 700 favorite, and everybody knows they're going to win, and it's meant to add to their highlight reel, basically. So it's kind of what we're seeing, from the UFC matchmakers here. But I don't always think that's a bad thing. Sometimes you need those kind of showcase moments for your guys that you want to promote. That being said, they're not going to, Anthony Hernandez is not going to be a minus, 800 favorite or whatever in his next fight. He's going to have to actually.
Hopefully not.
He's actually going to have to. I would assume he's actually going to have to come out there and fight somebody, really, 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 really tough. His story was heartbreaking. I honestly teared up a little bit. Made me think of my dad. So yeah, that was quite the inspirational story, and just hard not to root for the guy.
Yeah, for sure. I think this episode had its fair share of those backstories. Ryan Spann, like I said, with the comebacks, and with everything that Anthony Hernandez went through. That was a good one, and that's some of the best part about that's the best part about this show, is to be able to hear these backstories. It's not like Tough, where the drama coming into it is not fabricated, but it's something that was built up just from the fact that they're on the show. It's like real stories coming into it. A lot of these guys don't have this polished MMA background. They don't come from some of them, obviously, you have your fair share of guys that come from like crazy, collegiate wrestling backgrounds, things like that. But everybody has their own story, and they come from all walks of life. So it's really cool to be introduced to them through through the pure form of the sport, if you put it that way. For everybody that wants to call me an MMA purist, I just admitted it on camera. It is on record. So yeah, I digress.
I'm not gonna. Well, I am gonna shamelessly plug MMA Today, but like, even if it wasn't on MMA Today, I would still recommend people read the interview that Alex Scafidi did with Anthony Hernandez, because there's a lot more backstory there, and I know people are interested in the story, and she really gets deep, and you could tell really got the true his true emotions kind of captured here in the story, and it's kind of covers a little bit of everything, and his stuff with his dad is honestly just heartbreaking. So not for the faint of heart, but definitely check that out. Anthony Hernandez interview on MMA Today. But let's move on to Ryan Spann, who you just mentioned, came back. Another redemption story. Last week was.
We already talked about him.
Go ahead.
I said we already talked about Spann. Matt Sales.
Matt Sales. Okay. Well, I had forgot to mention. Let's bring that back up though. With Spann, second redemption story in 2 weeks.
Yeah, very cool. I think it's Menafield was a little bit different for me, just because he's always been somebody that people have believed in. Like, he hasn't really faced adversity yet. It's not his fault. Like, he's an excellent fighter. I think he has, a much more high potential ceiling than Ryan does, if I want to go out on a limb right now and say that. But, Span has proven people wrong, and he's gone into Contender Series and lost in 15 seconds, or whatever it was last season by Carl Roberson. It was under 30 seconds, I believe. So, Menifield's was a little bit different. Menifield's was more of a proving, like he was, people weren't sold on him, but now they are. Whereas, Spans was getting back the old beliefs on him, getting back people's old perception on him as being the guy that went into Contender Series and got knocked out in 15 seconds. So that was awesome. Good for him.
Yeah, and so the real main event, Matt Sales, taking on Yazan Hajar.
Mm-hmm.
Hope I didn't butcher that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about you, but I thought this was a pretty good matchup, and
yeah,
looking at it, I think that this was, I think it was a more, the odds were pretty accurate, but going into it, having seen them both fight, I thought this was really good matchmaking. This was like, you can't complain about this matchup. And Matt Sales had a solid layoff before this fight. His last fight was in March of 2017.
I was there.
You were there.
Yeah,
that was a good card.
San Diego. I think it's the only time that Cage Fury Fighting Championship.
Yeah, I was going to say they're usually an East Coast show. They're usually down in Philadelphia, New Jersey area.
It was very odd. They were at basically a nightclub here in San Diego, and it was the episode of Dana White Looking for a Fight, where the Team Alpha Male flyweight got a contract.
Yep, Joseph Morales.
Yeah, Morales got a contract, and I think somebody else eventually wound up getting signed.
Yeah, I'm looking over the card right now. It has some good names. Even some of the losers are like pretty notable names. So like Matt Sales versus Christian Aguilera was the main event, and Aguilera's headlining LFA this week. So, you got two good fighters there. And the co-main event was Joseph Morales and Sean Santella, who Shorty rocks one of the best fighters not in the UFC here in the Northeast. So that was a good fight. And then you also had Alex Perez on the card, Dan Ige on the card. And
both those guys in the UFC now.
Both of them are in the UFC, and then also Fernando Padilla, who's LFA
and Sales
guy promoting.
Yeah, Sales was headlining this card, and so originally, after the fights were over, I thought Sales was the one who was going to be getting the contract because he was so impressive. It wound up being Joseph Morales. I guess I had kind of forgotten at the time that Cynthia Calvillo had shouted out Joseph Morales.
Yeah.
So obviously there was some, the scales were kind of tipped in his favor. But at that event, I thought Alex Perez and Matt Sales were the most impressive. Not to say anything bad about Joseph Morales, but just I thought those guys had the best performances of the night, basically.
Yeah, I mean, the only things that I saw of it was the tidbits from that show. I know CFFC is kind of hard to come across their video. They do a good job with highlight videos, like, they'll do a CFFC 64 highlight video. But as far as full fights go, it's kind of tough because so many good prospects come out of their shows, and it's like I can't even watch them. I can't even see what the hype's about. I have to like hear it by word of mouth or whatever. So, but yeah, man, it seemed like Dana, when he was recording that show, was he kind of made some comment about how he was. The only guy he was there really to see was Morales, and that Sales was an added bonus, that he was surprised by him, and that, he saw an opportunity for him down the line. So that's what happened. And Sales he told me he's literally been sitting out since he talked to them after that event because they promised him something. So it took them 18 months, but they gave it. I
was going to ask why the long layoff? Because
Because he told me that they had told him about Contender Series, but they said that they probably wouldn't be able to get him on the summer one. This is what at least my interpretation was that they told him about Contender Series. Maybe they the night of the fight, they might have told him, an opportunity might come your way, stay ready type of thing. And then apparently when Contender Series was going on in the summer, they told him that he would be on for Contender Series in the winter, which is something that I reported about and Sean Bitter had reported about, but never happened, was winter Contender Series. So he said that time came and went, and it rolled around to the beginning of this year, and he was going to give him a little bit more time to see what was up and continue to improve. He's so young, that he didn't feel like he needed to rush it. But
plus, there's nowhere to fight out here. So I mean, what else?
Yeah. What's going on there, man? We go through this it's deja vu.
I just had to bring it up. I just got to complain every episode about.
Yeah, no, you have to. I have to bitch once an episode, and you have to complain once an episode. So that's great.
So I mean, he's in San Diego, obviously at Alliance MMA, great gym. And there's not much opportunity for him to train, but that 15-month layoff didn't seem to affect him much because he put the whooping on Yazan. I'm gonna butcher his name, Haja. I'm just gonna call him Haja.
No, that's right.
And it was like at this point you were just like, what in the world is Dana White gonna do? We've had these incredible finishes. We've seen Dana give out from as low as 1 to 2 contracts per show. And so it was like, for me, I was thinking, who's not going to get a contract? And, the obvious choice, there was one obvious choice out of the, 5 fights?
Yep.
That are on each card. And that was, clearly the Austin Springer, Giga Chikadze fight. I knew neither of those guys were going to get a contract. I knew that before the fight was even over. I honestly thought that because of Dwight Grant's age, that he wouldn't get a contract.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, man. I was getting nervous because, those are the guys that I kind of – a lot of times I gravitate towards proven commodities. I don't know why that is. I don't think I do very well as a promoter, but I was just seeing deja vu all over again from last week with Chris Curtis. So I'm glad that Dana decided to go with him, even though he's older. He doesn't have a lot of fight miles on him, doesn't have a lot of fight years on him. So clearly that was a very complete performance, and he's somebody that I'm super excited about seeing, compete at the highest level.
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming if you're listening to a podcast about the Contender series that you probably watched it. But just in case, I mean, Dana White gave out 4 contracts, which is unprecedented as far as I'm, aware of. I think he gave out 3 at one point last.
Yeah, the last episode of last season was 3.
So he gave out, the max was 3. So now it's brought it up to 4. And the way he was reeling the names off, it was kind of like, he would name one guy, and then I was like, and how could we not give this guy? How could we not give this? I was like, dang, like, he's really going for it.
It's funny, when he went on to the 4th one, when he talked about sales or whatever, I was like, he's going to give Austin Springer one too, isn't he? Like, it's going to be like the Oprah, that stupid Oprah gift that was, not funny a year ago, but people still use it. Well, you get a car.
Whoa.
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about.
The one that I used on the account?
Did you actually?
I hate you.
I didn't even know that.
While you were stealing all of my lines as well.
Oh yeah.
Uh-huh.
So you were the one on the account creeping in my DMs.
What?
I always talk to it like I know who's on the account.
See, it's usually gonna be me, but okay. I swear to God, you were copying some of my lines.
No.
Either that, or me and you are very on the same page. I'm leaning towards me.
No Carlos Mencia issues here.
No. But I think me and you are very as far as information wise goes, kind of anal about stuff.
Sure.
So, we'll give out these random facts and tidbits and shit.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of funny how some the same kind of news and tidbit stuff was coming out from both accounts. And I totally used the Oprah GIF. I totally did.
And I totally didn't see it, and I'm not kidding.
So it was the most unoriginal, obvious thing I could come up with.
Sorry, you can't you can bat. You can't bat 1,000 every time. Every game. So
yeah, I guess maybe I'm not a social media expert.
No, that's fine.
I mean, so Dwight Grant, Ryan Spann, Anthony Hernandez, and Matt Sales all get contracts. There's a featherweight There's one. All these guys are from different divisions. You have a featherweight, a welterweight, a middleweight, and a light heavyweight. And I'm assuming all of them are staying at the weights that they fought at.
Yeah, I don't see anybody that wouldn't. I mean, Span has dabbled at 185 pounds, but it seems like that might have been kind of a nightmare for him, and especially with the IV bans and everything else. I think that's part of the reason he moved up.
Yeah. So, I mean, we got new blood coming into 4 different divisions. We didn't do this last week, but throw this little segment out there. Who do these guys, who should these guys match up well with? And where do you see them at in the division?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the easiest one to start off with would be Ryan Spann, just because the light heavyweight division is a little more shallow and there's not a whole lot of options to start off, somebody with. But, maybe another guy that's within the 1-0 to 0-1 range. There's a handful of them. Maybe there's that guy that Sam Alvey fought, Marcin Prachnio. He fought him in Orlando, and Alvey knocked him out. That would be a good one. Another one that would be really interesting, just because there would be a kind of an unusual reach and size matchup, would be Mike Rodriguez from season 1 of Contender Series. I think that would be a really good matchup for Span. 2 of the longest reaches in the UFC.
Oh, for sure.
So that would be pretty cool. I'm just looking over the roster for the other guys, but
and I mean, how do you see Span stacking up in the division as a whole, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's athletic. I think he's got good finishing power. I think he's got some ground ability where he can finish fights there as well. It's tough, man, because time and time again we see these prospects come into the 205-pound division in the UFC, and we have really high hopes for them, and then they get ousted by the old guys who have been there forever. So it's kind of tough to say. I think he's certainly not the worst fighter on the roster. I think he's probably is a mid-tier guy right now, maybe a little bit below just in terms of his experience and things like that. But, we've seen him even in, he's inexperienced in the UFC, but he's experienced on the regional scene. So we've seen him even in his experienced age of fighting for LFA and these other promotions. We've still seen him improve. So I don't want to bubble him too much right now, put him in a box, because I think that we could still see the best Ryan Spann there is. But I don't think there's any reason to rush him, throw him in there, too quickly. And we'll see what happens.
Yeah, guy. I mean, as far if we're rating, I think the guys who clearly have the most upside on this out of these 4 that were signed are, and you could disagree with me here, but I think they're Matt Sales and Anthony Hernandez.
Yeah, I agree with you. Grant, I'm a little split on, just because he is 33, but he also doesn't compete very often because he can't get fights. So it's hard to tell if he's even hit his ceiling, like if we've even seen it. I don't think he necessarily struggled much tonight. So I don't know. We'll see. I think the next fight will be very telling for him once we see him go against a more established guy where he might be tested a little more. But I think, by far, the guy with the most upside is Anthony Hernandez. I think that, he's somebody that we'll see in the rankings within the next 18 months or so.
Can I throw a name out?
Yeah, absolutely. Hit me.
I want to see another Contender Series matchup in Charles Byrd.
That would be a good one. I would watch that for sure. He's coming off, he 1-0, coming off the win over off of who was that? The dude,
Sean Phillips.
Yes, SBG.
Yeah, SBG.
Yeah, the white Mike Tyson.
That
would be a good one. I would be interested in seeing that. Kind of looking over who we could give Matt Sales right now.
205 that's a tough one, man. I think, not that Span has the most upside, but just because the division is so shallow, and even someone like anybody else that comes out of the show out of 205, has a shot at making it to the top, because just situational wise, the division is what it is, and it's much easier to rise up in the rankings. I won't throw another. There's another Contender Series guy, but I won't throw him out there. But if you want to look up,
Yeah, I mean, for Matt Sales, I was kind of looking at, you know, I think that there's two matchups right now that are booked, and the winner of either of these two matchups would be appropriate. This weekend we have, it's kind of towards the bottom of the UFC featherweight division, but we have Rolando D, taking on Shane Young. I think that the winner of that would be a formidable opponent. Start him off slow, see where he's at. I see no reason to rush people into things. They like to do that first season, and it worked out pretty well for them. So, if they want to rush people in, I could see them giving them like maybe a Corey Sandhagen who's 1-0, or a Dan Ige, somebody like that, or even the other matchup I was referring to was Matt Bissett and Steven Peterson. They certainly have more experience than Sales, but I think that all those fights would provide entertainment value, and could be good matchups for Sales.
Yeah, and the other guy we haven't talked to, as far as where he matches up, Dwight Grant. Like you said, 33. Probably more in a win now mode, I guess. So you kind of throw him
CM Punk
a little bit tougher.
Yeah.
Is that the kind of mindset you go on with?
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting. It's an interesting one. I think maybe like a Luke Jumeau would be maybe a good one. 2-1 from Australia. I know he's got he just not just, but his last fight was in February, so he's probably getting ready to come back. Or even one of these guys like Abdul Razak Al Hassan or somebody like that. I think that would be a formidable opponent for Grant. Grant would probably be the underdog in a fight like that, but I think it would be a competitive one, and one that he could win, a winnable fight.
Yeah, I like those for sure. Just trying to give people like kind of like a quick overview of where these guys, realistically where they match up in the divisions, and who the kind of fighters they would be facing once they actually make it to the UFC. And if we're grading this card as a whole, what are we giving it?
Ooh, I'd give this one an A. A-, I'll say, just because I always want to leave room for improvement, but I really enjoyed this one. I thought it was just it brought that element that for some reason only Contender Series can provide, of just like bodies going stiff and people just getting knocked out left and right, and some weirdness here and there. So I can't complain, man. That was a really good episode. I like I said at the beginning of the show, I think it will be, when we get to the end, it will be one of the ones that we look back and say like that was peak Contender Series season 2.
I give it an A fucking plus. I mean, 5 finishes.
Well, if we're going pluses, if plus is in the system, if an A plus is in the system, then I'll go an A, because you can still get an A plus.
Okay. So yeah, I'm gonna give it the A plus, just because we got the 5 finishes. We had the redemption story in Span. We had the incredibly emotional, story with Anthony Hernandez. 4 contracts. Dana White in a good mood. I mean, not much else you could ask for.
He didn't do the fan input though. After all that,
Huh?
Did you see his tweet about how he was going to do fan input in between the decision and the fights?
Yeah, and then
it didn't happen. Then all of a sudden, Dana was like, they played like one promo between T. Edwards and Austin Tweedy.
That was incredibly fast.
And then all of a sudden he was ready. He didn't even do his thing. I guess it wouldn't have mattered though, if he's picking everyone.
I think maybe, and this might be totally false, but I mean, there was some backlash last week about Chris Curtis not being signed, right?
Yep.
And so, it's totally possible that they were like, hey, like, fans aren't think that maybe you're being a little too stingy with the contracts. And so he's like, fuck it, everybody gets contracts.
Yeah. Hey, every time I see that gift now, I'm gonna laugh. That's what's come out of this.
I hate you. I'm never gonna be able to use it again now. This is it is.
Well, I hope you do.
It is what it is. I can't use it again now. I guess did Dana White make the right decision? Are we allowed to say?
I think he did. You know, the only decision that wasn't. I don't think any of those guys were not deserving of a contract. So that the only other decision that he made would be to keep Austin Springer out, which it honestly kind of sucks. Like I felt kind of bad for him, but at the same time, yeah, it was just miserable, you know.
From a reality TV show kind of perspective, like
Yeah,
everybody's like, in this.
like they just like pan the camera away from him, like he's just sitting there. It's just like, it kind of sucked, man. I don't know. Talking to him, he's such a nice guy and stuff, and like he's got a family and everything, and he's got stay-at-home dad, and seems like a pretty stand-up guy. So it kind of shitty, Every time we watch these shows, for every person that earns a contract, there's at least one other one that's didn't. So just got to keep that in mind, and hope it opens some more doors for him.
I don't know if I'm just really cold-hearted, but if I was running the show, I mean, I would have had a camera all up in his face, like, just capturing like the pure disappointment, like reality.
Yeah. So when you preface that with, I don't know if I'm just a cold-hearted person, you can answer that question for yourself.
But I'm just saying, like if it was a real reality TV show,
they'd be all up in his grill.
They would just have the camera and like
they'd be hiding in his car afterwards.
How do you feel right now, huh?
Yeah.
How do you feel that you're the only one who didn't get a UFC contract?
Yeah.
Like bawling his eyes out, and
right.
They're like just grilling him. So.
Oh, thank God we haven't got to that level yet.
No, and I think that's why people like this over the Ultimate Fighter.
I agree.
But we will save that discussion for another day.
Sure.
I think we've already probably had it 10 million times, but another great show, very exciting, and packed it all in. How long did that show take? An hour and
an hour and somewhere between an hour and a half, an hour and 45 minutes. That was
amazing.
Not too shabby.
Yeah, and the quick Dana White decision really sped things along too.
Yeah,
so
perfect.
We were in and out there.
On my end.
Yeah.
That continues into week 3.
We'll see. I mean, I'm assuming we'll both be back for week 3, pending, unforeseen circumstances. Actually, Bellator is next week, so maybe not. But we will see. Regardless,
we'll record on Wednesday instead, or Thursday.
Yeah, someone will be doing it on some day next week, and we hope to see you back on what is now the ContenderCast. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, guys.